people are strong.
This was a unifying speech. It was a speech to all Americans.
African American unemployment stands at the lowest rate ever recorded.
The Democrats who could barely look there at a funeral, they could barely look at the guy.
My duty is to defend Americans and their right to the American dream, because Americans are dreamers too.
The message that Donald Trump outlined tonight is we're going to put America first.
Let's come together, set politics aside, and finally get the job done.
He moved a lot of people tonight. It was an inspirational and uplifting speech.
Live from Washington, D.C. on this Wednesday, which is Joel Fulton's birthday.
Happy birthday, Joel. Joel, how many years have you been with the show?
He's our
or working at Fox?
stage manager. 17
years.
Right.
Gosh, I thought you were 17 years old.
Listen,
Worked here your whole life.
and today the state of our union is chilly. It's 22 degrees. It feels like it's 13. It is so cold here on the roof that our printer actually froze. But somehow, ladies and gentlemen, we have 3 hours of telecasting right here.
The big story, the toner pushes back after all these years.
I don't know. I think
The toner is frozen.
I know, that's what I'm saying.
I think the big story is America, America, America this morning. Would you agree?
In what respect? You mean the speech that lasted an hour and 20 minutes and had 115 applause lines? Are you referring to the beginning of the year 2 of the Trump administration?
Do you know how many times the word America was used
How many
in that
times?
speech? 82 times.
That's fantastic. I thought the line of the night was Americans are dreamers too.
I thought so too.
And you know what? He started the speech by telling some unbelievable personal stories of people who were in the gallery, and we're going to hear some of those in a moment. But first of all, it was clearly, after 1 year, a victory lap. And here is the president talking about how America, under him, is winning.
Let's begin tonight by recognizing that the state of our union is strong because our people are strong. We have created 2.4 million new jobs. Unemployment claims have hit a 45-year low. African American unemployment stands at the lowest rate ever recorded. The stock market has smashed one record after another, gaining $8 trillion and more in value. We enacted the biggest tax cuts and reforms in American history. I recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. 1 year later, I am proud to report that the coalition to defeat ISIS has liberated very close to 100% of the territory. My duty, and the sacred duty of every elected official in this chamber, is to defend Americans and their right to the American dream. Because Americans are dreamers too. There is nothing we cannot achieve as long as we have confidence in our values, faith in our citizens, and trust in our God. We will. Open borders have allowed drugs and gangs to pour into our most vulnerable communities. Evelyn Rodriguez, Freddie Cuevas, Elizabeth Alvarado, and Robert Mickens. Their 2 teenage daughters, Kayla Cuevas and Nisa Mickens, on the eve of Nisa's 16th birthday. Neither of them came home. 6 members of the savage MS-13 gang have been charged with Kayla and Nisa's murders. Many of these gang members took advantage of glaring loopholes in our laws to enter the country as illegal, unaccompanied, alien minors. Everyone in America is grieving for you. Please stand. Thank you very much. We cannot imagine the depths of that kind of sorrow, we can make sure that other families never have to endure this kind of pain.
At one point, when the president did first start to talk about immigration and then shifted to MS-13, there were groans and murmurs from the Democrats who could not get behind the fact, apparently, that MS-13 is terrible and killed these families.
El Salvador is where they're located in Honduras. They come up, they formulate, they're supposed to get into this country and wreak havoc and get money and sell drugs. And they get a sponsor family and they spread out. Remember, I think it was Virginia, where they killed one guy and cut his heart out.
Yeah.
So he wants to make that a focus and he wants to show progress. And the other thing I thought was so important, if you put together a speech like this, sometimes you get through a list. I did this, I'm going to do this. I did this, I'm going to do this. He did not go more than 6 minutes without showing an illustration to his policies.
Right.
And this is another example. Remember when he was talking about North Korea and the brutality of that regime?
So there was a man standing who stood up in the crowd that was honored, and he grew up in North Korea. He held up his crutches because when he was a little boy, the dictator of North Korea was starving his family and his brothers and sisters. He was fighting for food. He went to a train and tried to steal some coal off the train so that he could trade it for food to feed his family. He was so famished he fell asleep or passed out on the train tracks and woke up with the train running over his limbs. He did not have any pain medicine when he was going through that, and then was also tortured by the dictator, by that evil regime. And those were the crutches that he used to heal and to get back to good health.
And
also,
by the way, his dad was tortured to death.
Also, Otto Warmbier's parents were there.
Yeah.
Another highlight was the Albuquerque, New Mexico police officer who adopted the little baby from the mother who was addicted to heroin. There were so many unbelievable stories. And it wasn't just all about me, Donald Trump. It was about you, America. And in so many times, the news about what has happened to our economy is good. And yet, when you look at, we actually put together a montage of when the Democrats would not stand for good news that's good for all Americans, seemingly. Was it political? You be the judge.
I call upon all of us to set aside our differences, to seek out common ground, and to summon the unity we need to deliver for the people. This is really the key. These are the people we were elected to serve. Hispanic American unemployment has also reached the lowest levels in history. Preston's reverence for those who have served our nation reminds us of why we salute our flag and why we proudly stand for the national anthem. In America, we know that faith and family, not government and bureaucracy, are the center of American life. The motto is, "In God we trust."
I can't believe the Democrats didn't stand when he said this is why we stand for the national anthem. He had just told a story of this little boy, Preston, who was sitting next to the First Lady. And Preston put 40,000 American flags on graves because his grandfather was a World War II vet, went to visit his gravestone and said, we need to do better. This looks terrible. And he personally put carnations and flags on those graves. And the president mentioned that and said, that's why we stand for the national anthem. And the Democrats still remained seated.
Yeah, a lot of people said that was a shot at the NFL. Here's a list of some of the issues that the Democrats chose not to stand for most. Because I saw Senator Joe Manchin stand a few times by himself. Tax reform, the national anthem, God, veterans health care, fair trade, which I think that they were for. The stock market, I thought they were pro-stock market infrastructure. I thought they were going to do a deal with Republicans on that. The deal for Dreamers, which was more than most Republican presidents could ever dream of giving up in the initial bargaining point. Immigration reform, military funding, which I thought everyone agreed we need to increase, and low African unemployment.
Well, obviously, it is a strategy by the Democrats in that that big building behind us, clearly they don't want the president, they don't want the Republicans to get any credit. They don't want to show unity in the building, but when you actually put them all in the same room and you see people clapping for God and that whole list of things right there, and you see another party not clapping, it's like, really?
Because we don't
really, you can't stand for that.
The partisan divide is obvious.
Can't stand for the flag.
Two things got to get done: infrastructure and some type of immigration reform, and they got to get a budget. 3 things, and they got to get a budget passed. You need 60 votes. So at some point, the Common Sense Coalition, which is led on the left by Joe Manchin, has got to do something. He stood a lot. He's going to be joining us today.
Well, that's right. 1. That's not 60. It looks like it's going to be the party of nope. Sorry, Mr. President, can't help you.
You're going to need about 10.
So anyway, what did you think of last night's festivities here in the Capitol? Email us, friends@foxnews.com. Meanwhile, the president calling for unity during the State of the Union, but that's not what the media heard. Look.
One thing's pretty clear, John. He did not unify that chamber tonight.
George, I've never seen anything like it.
Very tough about saying immigrants are basically killers.
David Brody is here with the real headline from the State of the Union next, plus Jason Chaffetz, Dan Bongino, and Lee Carter coming up.
Look at our fancy coffee pot back there.
President Trump calling for strength and unity during the State of the Union address.
Will he get it? But the media must have missed that message.
Here to discuss his chief political correspondent for the Christian Broadcasting Network and host of CBN's Faith Nation, David Brody. Dave, what did you think?
I tell you what, a couple things. First of all, this America, he kept talking about how I love America. I mean, that's what it was. It was I love America 82 times. And when I say 82 times, he literally said the word America 82 times. We looked up. 82
Americans
times
are dreamers too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was a little knife in the side there. But so I thought that was very crucial. And then, of course, you look at the media, and they don't understand it. They've never been able to understand the connection between what he is saying about this pro-America message, and not just the base, but middle-class Americans that are Democrats and independents as well, and that's key.
Just some of the responses, fascinating. CBS does a poll. What do you think of the speech? 75% liked it. The Washington Post put out a headline briefly that said, something optimistic, and they got blasted, and they changed their headline. Here's a look at some of how the media reacted to the speech.
One thing's pretty clear, John. He did not unify that chamber tonight.
George, I've never seen anything like it. Right now, the Democrats have basically run for the exits.
It almost got ugly. Very tough about saying immigrants are basically killers.
It was also just a particularly gloomy speech. I mean, he didn't mention the word carnage, but he talked a lot about carnage. It was a sad speech there at the end, and did not unify.
Well, at least she didn't cry that time.
Right. You know, I grew up Jewish and everything. There's the Oy vey level, and then there's the Oy gewollt level, and I think we just saw
what they're at it.
Yeah, that was Oy gewollt for sure. Look, NBC was off the rails last night. I mean, they could have been broadcasting this from the Russian tea room.
What do you mean?
I mean, literally.
That's Russia. It used to be Russia.
Yeah, and they were talking about Mueller as he's taking the podium. I mean, Mueller. It was.
What does she mean carnage? I mean, the only carnage that comes to mind is what MS-13 did to those 2 young girls.
That's exactly right, which gave him such a compassionate moment last night, for sure.
So, David, if the other networks that we just highlighted are out for the president with long knives, that must mean he did a good job.
Right. So, obviously, it's a success.
Right.
I will say it was interesting. Someone on another network, an analyst, talked about how this president was selling sweet candy with poison in it.
What?
Which was, well, what in the world was he talking about? So the question is, what is the poison? It was referring to immigration. Is the poison, I don't know, 1 million more dreamers than the Democrats even asked for? Is the poison a pay child tax credit? I mean, talk about bipartisanship. I mean, infrastructure. This is what the Democrats want. This is not a conservative talking point.
You can't argue. The president gave a lot on the initial proposal on immigration, and he also the economy is doing well. Don't talk down the economy. If people are actually doing well, you lose credibility.
Well, and that's another part of the speech. It came at a great time for him. You know, the 401k, the economy, the stock market, all of that.
Bonuses.
All that. Plus, oh, by the way, we're doing pretty well against ISIS.
All right, David, thanks for coming up on the Chili Roof.
And thanks for yesterday, too. All right, meanwhile, it may have been the line of the night. President Trump on immigration.
My duty is to defend Americans and their right to the American dream, because Americans are dreamers too.
It got a standing ovation from Republicans. And what did Democrats at home think? And some of the dreamers in the audience? Lee Carter has brand new dials. She's cold.
Hey, Lee.
Hey.
Later on when I got home, critics.
Good morning to you from New York City. We'll be back with more on the State of the Union live from Washington in just a few minutes. But first, some other stories making headlines this morning. The Justice Department launching an internal investigation into whether ousted Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe slowed down the Hillary Clinton email probe. The Washington Post reports McCabe knew about emails on Anthony Weiner's laptop at least 3 weeks before James Comey notified Congress about them. Those emails sent to Weiner's laptop by his wife and Clinton aide, Huma Abedin. McCabe stepped down from his post on Monday. The president caught on a hot mic vowing to release a classified intelligence memo.
Let's release the memo. Oh, yeah. Don't worry. 100%.
Well, there you have it. President Trump speaking to Congressman Jeff Duncan after the State of the Union. The FISA memo reportedly details surveillance abuses by the Justice Department and FBI during the 2016 election. And Hillary Clinton explaining her decision not to fire a campaign aide accused of sexual harassment 10 years ago. The failed presidential candidate publishing a statement on Facebook minutes before the State of the Union. Clinton explaining that at the time she didn't think firing Bernd Strider was the best solution to the problem. She stops short of apologizing, but says she wouldn't make the same decision again. Now back down to Washington, D.C. Good morning, Ainsley.
Good morning to you, Jillian. Thank you so much. Well, you've been hearing the analysts' reaction to the President's State of the Union speech.
Well, now it's time to hear from you, the people.
President and partner with Metzlansky and Partners is Lee Carter here, looking at some instant analysis from what the people thought of at home. Welcome, Lee.
Glad to be here.
One of the most impactful statements was about the Dreamers.
That's right.
Because there were Dreamers brought in by Democrats in the gallery at the same time the president made a dissemination.
That's right. And I think you're going to be surprised by the reaction here.
The line that everyone loved was, Americans are dreamers too. Let's listen to this and watch the dials.
The sacred duty of every elected official in this chamber is to defend Americans, to protect their safety, their families, their communities, and their right to the American dream. Because Americans are dreamers too.
Well, I shouldn't say everyone loved it, but Democrats did give it a middle of the road. Normally, their line is a lot lower.
That's right. There was not a single moment last night where the Democrats went to the floor. And we have seen over and over again that blue line's usually, sometimes you can't even see it. So you saw Republicans gave it an A, Independents an A, Democrats a C. This was really, really a surprise to me. I didn't expect Democrats to respond so favorably, and they did.
But the headline for me is the number of independents that are back with the president and the Republicans. Watch the line when the president was talking about the economy. Watch the independents. They're up there with the Republicans.
The great news for Americans, 401k, retirement pension, and college savings accounts have gone through the roof. And just as I promised the American people from this podium 11 months ago, we enacted the biggest tax cuts and reforms in American history.
So you can see there, Republicans and Independents pretty much in balance with each other, giving it an A-. Democrats gave it a D+. Now, that's not that bad, considering that Democrats don't support this tax plan. But we've seen a huge, improvement in the public opinion on tax reform, from a third that approved it when it was passed, now to nearly half of Americans saying it's a good thing. And I think we're going to see that continue to rise.
Now, if the personal brackets change and people are bringing home more money, Democrats got to make a choice here. Strategically, it doesn't make any sense to continue to run down the economy.
It really doesn't make sense. And I think that the fact that the Democrats stayed seated during that portion is not going to work in their favor, because I think the American people are feeling more and more optimistic about their pocketbooks.
Well, the president used the opportunity to also highlight a little boy who's put flags on graves after he visited his grandfather's grave and at Arlington, which was a really touching moment. He was sitting next to Melania. You can see him there with the red tie, cute little boy. And after the president told his story, he said, that is why we stand for the national anthem. Watch the polls. Watch how the folks that you polled, Lee, reacted to that.
Preston's reverence for those who have served our nation reminds us of why we salute our flag, why we put our hands on our hearts for the Pledge of Allegiance and why we proudly stand for the national anthem.
Well, and that was looked at as a shot at the NFL, and people thought, well, why did he do that? Others loved it.
They loved it. That story about that little boy, Republicans gave an A+, Independents an A-, and even Democrats gave that a C, right. And that's basically an A from the Democrats.
So for the independents, who are the ones who essentially decide elections when it comes to the president, for them to be drifting back toward the Republicans, what does that say to you?
It says to me that the Democrats are going to have it tougher than they expect. I think the Democrats think that's going to be easy for them in the midterms, and hopefully they're thinking in 2020, it's not, because those independents are really what's going to make it up. They're coming back. And when you see he lost 12% of approval among independents, and you're seeing that that's starting to shift, I think that's really going to help.
And the one thing we know, Lee, it is January.
That's
so
right.
much changes every day, let alone every season, let alone 8 months.
But if the economy continues to do well, I think that's what Americans care about.
That's right. And I think this speech really made people feel optimistic that hadn't felt so recently. I think he did a great job.
Thank you very much for staying up late and doing the dials.
Anytime.
Right.
Thank you.
All right. Meanwhile, President Trump making a break from President Obama when he said this.
But we must be clear. Terrorists are not merely criminals. They are unlawful enemy combatants.
And he's also keeping Gitmo open, he said. Dan Bongino's here to react to that, plus Jason Chaffetz on the behind-the-scenes moments that you didn't see. What actually happened in the chamber, he's going to tell us. Coming up.
Those guys need coats.
Tonight, I am extending an open hand to work with members of both parties, Democrats and Republicans, to protect our citizens of every background, color, religion, and creed. My duty, and the sacred duty of every elected official in this chamber, is to defend Americans, to protect their safety, their families, their communities, and their right to the American dream. Because Americans are dreamers too.
Well, this morning when Dan Bongino and I were huddled around the coffee pot in the other tent, Dan, you said that was the line of the night.
That was it. That was it. I mean, if that was a Democrat State of the Union speech, the line would have been Americans are deplorables too. I mean, it speaks to the difference. But, the Democrats have owned us for decades on messaging. Finally, we were just talking about this, Donald Trump has turned the corner and learned how to talk. We're not talking about 401ks in a methadone clinic anymore. We're talking like real people talk. Americans are dreamers. Americans are back. Right. And the Democrats will stick with the deplorable stuff. We'll stick with the dreamer stuff.
Yeah, you were saying during the commercial that Donald Trump is teaching Americans how to fight, how to win, not be a doormat. He let the government shut down because he felt so strongly about immigration. He passed this tax reform. People are getting bonuses, and he's winning.
It's not who Donald Trump is. It's how he communicates that the left still doesn't get. I was having a conversation last night, and someone said to me, it's interesting that Trump is richer than Mitt Romney, and yet nobody treats Trump like the rich guy, because it's not about his money. It's about how he talks and relates to people. Nobody cares that he's worth $1
And
million.
how do we know that? Because he used to tell everybody, I'm richer than Mitt Romney. But here's the other thing he brought up. The fact is, the numbers don't lie. Black and Hispanic unemployment is at all-time lows. But when that line was read, they didn't react. Everyone sat on their hands, including Julian Castro and others.
Yeah. There were a lot of really disgraceful moments last night on the Democrats' part. I was very upset. I mean, I'm a partisan actor. I don't claim to be down the middle. But you've had inner cities absolutely ruined, minority populations in inner cities. These are American citizens whose lives have been decimated by big government. Finally, Donald Trump, of all people, turns it around. Black unemployment at historically low levels.
Right.
And the Congressional Black Caucus can't get up and apply. I mean, is this not a nonpartisan issue?
Well, they're upset about his comments with Charlottesville, and they're upset about what he allegedly said to Dick Durbin.
Yeah, but are they upset about results? You have black men and women who now are in an employment environment where they can be prosperous for their kids and live in the America all of the rest of us live in. We've been living in two Americas, liberal America in inner cities and our America. Donald Trump has brought the two together.
Well, obviously the Democrats made a political decision. They wouldn't stand for anything that would make the president look good or to make it look like they're united. Luis Gutierrez actually left the chamber when people were chanting USA, USA. Just got up and left.
Well, at one point, he
He's
talks about
retiring anyway.
Yeah,
He's running for president.
Yeah, of course. I mean, they never really retire; they just retire up. Right. But what happened there was interesting because he mentioned also standing for the national anthem.
Yeah.
And who stands? Only the Republicans. Like you would think the Democrats, just for that, would say, "Okay, we can all agree."
The president did sign an executive order making sure that people understand that Gitmo is going to be open for business during his term. He also said this about terrorists.
Terrorists who do things like place bombs in civilian hospitals are evil. When possible, we have no choice but to annihilate them. When necessary, we must be able to detain and question them. But we must be clear. Terrorists are not merely criminals. They are unlawful enemy combatants.
So that means they go to Gitmo now. Now, my question is, the next time somebody, an ISIS member, runs over someone in a bike path or tries to blow up people at the Port Authority with a pipe bomb, do we put them in Gitmo? Or are we going to keep putting them in our prisons?
Well, obviously, it depends who it is. If it's an American citizen, it's not going to be an option. But this is the kind of language Americans expect from the commander-in-chief. These are terrorists. We're not negotiating. We kill these people because they want to kill us first. It's not. We don't live in a moral vacuum. We live in a very, very odd, dangerous time. These people their lives need to be terminated. They want to kill us, and this is how people expect the commander.
And they want to be killed because they want to go to the next life.
The Gitmo line's important too. We're not sending them to Sandals for a vacation anymore.
Right.
They're going to
the Gitmo line was trending on social media. Folks really liked that line. Now, what did you make of them the Democrats choosing Joe Kennedy to make the speech after the president? Because, a Democrat makes a speech or the opposing party makes a speech after the president makes the State of the Union.
Maybe they'll pick Chelsea Clinton next. I mean, talk about a weak bench. They have nobody. I mean, look at what they have. They have Bernie Sanders, who's a devout socialist. They have Elizabeth Warren, who just doubled down on the "you didn't build that." Right. I mean, what's next?
So let's go ahead and take a look at his soundbite. Here he is, Mr. Kennedy, talking about the past year under Mr. Trump.
Many have spent the last year anxious, angry, afraid. We are bombarded with one false choice after another. Bullies may land a punch. They may leave a mark. But they have never, not once, in the history of our United States, managed to match the strength and spirit of a people united in defense of their future.
A lot of people are talking about the Vaseline on his lips.
Yeah. Capstick. Yeah, what is he, a mixed martial arts fighter? They Vaseline up your face.
But obviously the Kennedy resemblance is there. He was a student under Elizabeth Warren, and that was the message. It was well delivered, though, right?
Yeah, well, the difference is John F. Kennedy actually engaged in one of the largest take-home pay tax cuts in American history. That is not this Kennedy now. Matter of fact, John F. Kennedy would be a Republican today. That's the irony of that speech.
I do want to bring it to this in the Washington Post, one of the stories on the front page.
Yeah.
The Internal Justice Department probes Andrew McCabe's role in the final weeks of the 2016 election. The Inspector General wants to know why he sat on Anthony Weiner's laptop emails for 3 weeks. Where's this going? Who wrote this story?
Andy McCabe is in a world of trouble right now. Let's be clear. Andy McCabe's number 2 at the FBI during 2 critical investigations. The Trump investigation, the CIA investigation, counterintelligence investigation, and the investigation into Hillary Clinton. And what he's going to have to answer for is how did Hillary Clinton skate and how did Mike Flynn get prosecuted based on an interview on a false...
Who wrote this story?
Devlin Barrett.
Why does that matter?
It matters because Peter Strzok, who's the number 2 in the counterintelligence division, intimately involved in this case, is texting his paramour there, Lisa Page, and mentions Devlin Barrett as their reporter.
So they were leaking. They were leaking to the Washington Post. Now he's writing the story.
While he was at the Wall Street Journal, he was their source to leak it too, which is fascinating.
Dan, thank you very much for joining us 2 days in a row.
2 days in a row, no sleep.
Right.
I love you guys.
And no Under Armour T-shirts or heat.
Nothing.
All right.
Muscle.
Absolutely. Still ahead. Reaction to the president's address from Corey Lewandowski and David Bossie. They only appear together. I don't know why. Senator Joe Manchin will appear by himself. He's got courage, as does Newt Gingrich from an undisclosed location.
And Jason Chaffetz was in the room for the State of the Union. What happened behind the scenes that we didn't see? He's going to come in and spill the beans. Live from Washington, D.C. This is the State of the Union postgame show on Fox and Friends.
Great.
Girl, I'm coming in hot. A girl I already...
As a former member of Congress, our next guest was actually on the floor as the president addressed the country in his first State of the Union address.
That's right. Fox News contributor and former GOP Congressman Jason Chaffetz is here with an inside look of what we didn't see behind the scenes at the State of the Union. Jason, I guess when all these Democrats are boycotting, that leaves you a few seats.
Yeah, there were a few extra seats on the floor. Yeah, it wasn't hard finding it was, and they fill it in with staff. You know, the back, they make it look at
seat
the diplomatic corps comes in, they fill in the seats with the staff. But it's an honor to be on the floor of the House when the president is addressing the nation.
Absolutely, and because you were right there. We had heard when the president was talking about Dreamers and then shifted to MS-13, there was it sounded like groaning. You said it wasn't just groaning, it was hissing?
There were times where you could hear, audibly hear hissing that was going on.
Hissing, like a snake?
And look, it was an absolute total embarrassment. The Democrats, you're talking about mom, apple pie, the American flag, and God we trust, first responders, the military, and their Democrats could not get up out of their seat, could not clap their hands.
And the one part I heard about when I was able to hear from the television, we all were, was the booing, and it was brought up right here. Let's look.
Open borders have allowed drugs and gangs to pour into our most vulnerable communities. They have caused the loss of many innocent lives. Here tonight are two fathers and two mothers. Their two teenage daughters, Kayla Cuevas and Nisa Mickens, were close friends on Long Island.
That audio was not as bad as it was on the floor. I can tell you on the floor it was worse than that. You're trying to focus on the president. You want to go and recognize the people, but at least off to your left, at least from where I was sitting, these
hisses and boos,
hissing and booing, and
how rare is that?
It's stand
how
up.
How rare is that?
Look, it is rare. And look, they had a script. It is the resist movement. It doesn't matter what the president says or how he does it, and how dare the president actually do what he says. I sat on the floor for 8 years and listened to Barack Obama, but we were polite. We were nice. We stood and applaud, but when you're
you didn't stand and applaud every time. It was it's always partisan.
Yes, but when you're recognizing first responders, ordinary Americans who have done extraordinary things, when you're talking about the flag and God we trust, of course, that's when the country needs to be united. And it was pretty disgusting on the floor. And I tell you, a lot of members were sorely disappointed that they couldn't just be Americans that night and show a little respect, not just to the president, but show respect to the world, that we actually stand behind the men and women who make this country so great.
I know they're thinking about the election coming up in November, and all the House members are up for re-election, and a third of the senators are up for re-election.
Yeah.
And that's on their mind. But when they don't stand, when the president is talking about bonuses and our paychecks and people getting jobs and unemployment being lower than ever, does that backfire come November?
Hey, I think America got to see the difference. If you're not standing and saluting our flag, if you're not standing, recognize. And I had a chance afterwards to meet an American hero. The Army Staff Sergeant. I was able to go up there and shake his hand and thank him for his service.
There he is.
And honored to meet a true hero. How in the world can anybody on that floor justify sitting on their hands and not clapping?
And you say the attitude was upbeat with the Republicans?
Oh, yeah. Anytime the president gives a good speech, it's good. It's good on the floor.
All right, Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
2 days in a row.
Yeah. All right, they were some of President Trump's special guests last night.
Here tonight are Steve Staub and Sandy Keplinger of Staub Manufacturing. One of Staub's employees, Corey Adams, is also with us tonight, and he's a great welder.
The crew from Staub Manufacturing, they're here to talk about the State of the Union experience and their message for the Democrats. That's next.